Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Consumer Warrior Podcast. This is the podcast that's dedicated to helping you with your big debt problems. If you're just dabbling in debt, this isn't the podcast for you. We deal with the big debt problems like repossession, debt collection lawsuits, foreclosure, bankruptcy, and all the other horrible financial problems that are out there. We're here to help you to help yourself. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, John Skiba, and I'm a consumer protection attorney in the state of Arizona. And on today's episode, I want to talk about what you can do with your year-end bonus, assuming you're so lucky to get one from an employer, as far as dealing with your debt problem. Now, I'm recording this episode towards the end of the year, so this is really something that will be beneficial to people who receive year-end bonuses. But the principles that I'm going to talk about as they relate to debt settlement are applicable to really any time of the year. But before I get into that topic, I want to talk about our sponsor today, which is the Consumer Warrior Project. Let me tell you a little bit about what the Consumer Warrior Project is all about. And that is providing you with tools to help you to deal with the legal issues that show up in serious debt problems. So if you're representing yourself in a debt collection lawsuit where like a credit card company or a debt buyer has sued you, if you're trying to decide if bankruptcy is a good option, if you're dealing with repossession, whatever the legal issue is, there's different tools and templates, forms, and even some video tutorials that I put together over at legal.coach. That's the actual website, www.legal.coach. You can go over there and find all those tools and resources to help you as you navigate the legal part of your debt problem. Okay, so let's get into today's topic, which is dealing specifically with, it's really a debt settlement question, as far as what's the approach you should take in trying to settle your debts. But particularly at the end of the year, there's a couple factors that can help you in getting your debt settled more quickly. And those are, one is a lot of employers pay out end-of-year bonuses or some sort of lump sum Christmas bonus that you could use to help settle your debt. And the other thing is that many of the debt collectors are eager to get the books closed out, or they're paid on a commission, so they want to get things taken care of, so they may take less just to get things resolved prior to the end of the year. Now, if you get the bonus, here's my recommendation as far as the approach you need to take to getting it settled. The first thing you need to do is to create a settlement budget. You need to look at the amount of money that you're getting, what you're going to be able to use to try to settle these debts, and determine really what the most is that you're willing to pay, and then come up with maybe some starting points. And before you can do that, you've got to know the totality of debts that you're dealing with. And so my recommendation is that you get a copy of your credit report. You can get one of those at annualcreditreport.com. The federal law allows that once a year you can get a copy of your credit report for free. It usually doesn't have the score on it, but you can get a copy of it and at least see what debts are owed. And then what you do is create, like I said, a budget. You need to allocate certain portions of the budget depending on the types of debts you have. Now, if the bonus that you're getting is not significant enough to really deal with all of your debt problems, then you need to focus on the ones maybe that are the most problematic. Is there one that's suing you right now? Are you behind on your car payment? What are the types of things where they're going to cause a little more pain than the ones that are more dormant and aren't really doing anything? And once you come up with your settlement budget, then you need to start reaching out to the creditors. Now, a couple things before you send money to anybody, you need to see who the actual owner of the account is. This is particularly true when it comes to credit card debt, because nowadays, it isn't like it was even 10 or 15 years ago where most creditors sued on their own debt, if they sued at all. What they often will do, most credit card companies now, will package the debts up. Once they become delinquent, they charge them off, package them up, and sell them to these companies that we affectionately call junk debt buyers. They go out and buy really delinquent accounts for pennies on the dollar, and then they usually file suit on them. Now, you want to make sure you know who the right party is that you're dealing with, because this can be complicated even further by the fact that many original creditors and even junk debt buyers will hire debt collection agencies who actually don't have any kind of ownership interest in the account, but they're hired as a hired gun, essentially to go out and see if they can get some type of payment on this. So you want to find out who the correct party is that you're dealing with, who actually owns the account, so that you know who the correct people are to reach out. And the best place, again, for you to find that out is by looking at a copy of your credit report. Same thing goes with amount owed. Once you know who the correct party is to contact, you need to reach out to them and find out what the exact dollar amount is that's owed on the account. And then if you have if there's any discrepancies or problems you have with that, you need to have them to provide you with a breakdown, which they're required to do if you request it in writing under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Now, when you're putting together your settlement budget, I have some kind of rules of thumb that I work with when I'm working with clients to try to settle debt. And that is, let's say I have 3 different creditors that I'm trying to work with. The first thing I look at is the owner of the account, is it still the original creditor or is it a debt buyer? Because if it's a original creditor, you're going to need to allocate more money to that particular account to get it settled effectively. And the reason why is because they typically do not take less than the amount owed unless it's a pretty significant chunk, to get it done, or if it's very delinquent. So the original creditors, I usually set aside a little bit more in the budget to get those cases settled out. Now, if it's a junk debt buyer, this is a company that paid pennies on the dollar, sometimes less than a penny on the dollar, to purchase this account, so you can set aside a little bit less to try to settle out those accounts. And I also kind of lump medical bills in with this type of settlement as well, because generally my experience is medical collectors and medical providers will often take considerably less than what's actually owed, even more than an original creditor. So even if it's the same hospital that provided the services, they'll often take much less than what's actually owed just to get this cleaned off their books. The percentages that I use, original creditor, I always say you need to allocate at least 50% of what they're claiming is owed to try to settle it. You're obviously going to start much less than that when it comes to negotiation, but you need to have at least 50% set aside. If you're dealing with a debt buyer, I say 15 to 20% of what it is that they're seeking. And with medical debt, I would say 15% as well. You're always going to start lower than what it is that where you want it to actually settle, because regardless of what you offer them, you could offer them 99% of it and they're going to come back at 99.5. They're going to come back and want some type of higher amount. So start a little bit lower than where you want to end up and what you have the ability to end up, based upon this settlement budget that you're putting together, and start your discussions that way. Now, particularly if it's like the end of the year like this where you only have a couple of weeks, and like I said, they're going to be motivated to get this done, you're probably not going to have a lot of time to send letters back and forth. And so what you can do this over the telephone, but one thing that I highly recommend and I require in all of my negotiations is that if an agreement is reached, if the debt collector, the creditor, debt buyer, whoever it is, says, okay, we've got a deal here, I need something in writing before they get a payment. It can be an email, it can be a fax, it doesn't have to be anything formal, but I need something in writing saying that they're willing to take a certain dollar amount to take care of the account in full, and that they'll update the information on the credit report. Now, one thing that you want to understand here, something that a lot of people get caught up on when they're doing debt settlement, is they want the creditor to delete the account in its entirety. So they want to settle the account and then say, you got to delete it off my credit. And it's understandable. You're trying to improve your credit score. You want this negative derogatory account just off of there. Most creditors will push back against that. It doesn't hurt to ask, but most creditors will push back against that. And the reason that they give, I have a little bit of sympathy for, because I think they're right, at least a little bit, in that their obligation, if they're reporting something to the credit reporting agencies like TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, their legal obligations are, if they are providing information to those credit reporting agencies, is that they have to report accurately. And so what they will say is, hey, we'll report that you've settled this, and that's how it will generally show up. It'll say settled for less than the amount owed. But we're not going to, misstate anything as far as just getting rid of it or saying that you paid more than you did. They're just going to say what happened. You'll still get a benefit to that because it's going to show that it's settled, but it won't be an active collection account, won't be an active derogatory, and it will eventually fall off. So you can ask for them to remove it. Generally doesn't happen. It will happen sometimes, and people will put that in the notes to the the comments to this video or to the podcast. I understand that because I always ask as well. But I'm just saying it shouldn't be a deal breaker because you're in a position right now to get something settled and get it taken care of pretty quickly. So once they give you something in writing, again, whether it's an email, fax, whatever it is, at that point you're good to go. You can make the payment on it. One final thing, and I probably should say this even before you send the money, something you need to understand when you settle debt is that there's potential tax liability for settling a debt. And how this works is, if a creditor forgives any amount over $600, they're required to provide to you a 1099-C. And what the 1099-C is it states that any amount over $600 you actually have to treat as income on your taxes next year. So let's say you have a credit card account and it's $10,000 and it's just this old thing, it's charged off, and they agree to settle for $2,000. So you pay them the $2,000. Well, then you can expect to get in January, usually the very next January, a 1099-C from that company for $8,000 because that's the amount that was forgiven. You then, when you prepare your taxes, have to show that 1099-C, and it may be treated as income for purposes of filing taxes, which means you could end up paying taxes on that $8,000 of forgiven debt. Now, that is, that sucks, but I always say it's better to pay taxes on $8,000 than it is to pay $8,000. I also tell people if you're doing a lot of debt settlement and you're expecting a lot of 1099-Cs to show up that following year, highly, highly recommend you use an accountant or a CPA who is familiar with that whole process while you're filing your taxes. Even if you typically do it on your own and you feel totally comfortable doing it, I'd highly recommend you use an accountant because there are some, I don't want to call them loopholes, but essentially if you are insolvent at the time that you get the 1099-C, there may not be any tax liability at all. And this is particularly true if you have big credit card debt. I mean, if you're dealing with credit cards that are $20,000 and $30,000 and they're settling for 10 grand or something like that, you could get really large 1099 liability in the future. So it's important that you have somebody helping you with the taxes on that to help you to avoid as much of that liability as possible. So hopefully you are getting that big bonus, and hopefully this is a great end of year for you, and this is the first step in really getting the debt problem you have under control and getting these accounts settled. I appreciate you listening in today. That is going to do it for this episode of the Consumer Warrior Podcast. Again, if you need some help with these things, I recommend you head on over to the Consumer Warrior Project page at legal.coach. That's www.legal.coach, where there are forms, templates, video tutorials, and all kinds of things to help you out. Appreciate you watching today, and I'll catch you next time.